We are in the end of a series. We've been going through 1 Peter. If this is your first week to be here with us, well, I mean, you can go back and look at that stuff if you want to, and if you don't, that's fine. Because I think that today, I think it relates to people in their relationships, whatever those relationships are. And honestly, whether you're watching online or whether you're here today, I think there's some application points here that really do work, even apart from the church, even apart from our faith. I think it's how the world works. I think it's how, and so hopefully you can get something out of that too. But for sure, I want to speak to people who consider themselves disciples of Jesus Christ, who consider themselves followers of Jesus Christ. I think the stuff we want to talk about today, I think is concrete and kind of essential for anybody who claims to be a follower of Him. It's hard to do, but I think it's really powerful stuff to do. And what the chapter is, we're in 1 Peter chapter 5 today. It's talking about the older people in the church relating to the younger people and how they all get along with one another. And it's just basic relationship conversation about the elders and the people under the elders. And I thought when I was reading it, it's kind of like the circle of life, thinking that's a biology term. And it turns out that it's not. The circle of life's not a biology term. The life cycles is biology. An ecosystem, how it all kind of, everything balances into each other a little bit. That's biology. But circle of life is there. It's just that. So I thought it was beyond that movie. I thought the movie took the phrase from something else, but apparently they just kind of invented it. And in fact, in the movie, if you're a cartoon aficionado and you've watched Lion King, you remember that the Mufasa, he's the older, wiser lion, tells the younger lion that we hunt the antelope, but when we die, our bodies go to the grass, and the antelopes eat the grass. And there's this big circle, and that the lions, who are at the top of the food chain, have an obligation not to do too much to overhunt because we're all in this together. That was the lions. The lions are real humanitarians in Lion King, and so we're all in this together. We're not going to do mean and then the older lion dies and another lion takes over. He becomes the king, and he doesn't subscribe to that theory, and the whole circle of life kind of gets broken. Everything gets messed up because the lions aren't acting the way they're supposed to. And the plot of the movie is that there is a way, a single way. It's not a lot of ways it can work out. There is a way that nature is supposed to work. And when the circle is completely balanced, everything is beautiful. And when the circle is not balanced, that it's all out of line. And biology, I looked this up, and it's not certainly my area of expertise, but environmental biologists will tell you that strictly speaking, there's not one right way to do a lot of nature. And certainly man-made stuff can cause trouble, but even without human beings being a consideration, climate changes or a fire or a flood or a new predator comes into the environment or even a virus, like a COVID virus for people, but even a virus can get into the animals. The climate, the ecosystem is always changing. And what's true is that each thing that changes might affect everything else. It has a way of rippling out there. But the idea that there's just one perfect way for it to be really isn't a scientific way of thinking about it. It's more of a Lion King way of thinking about it. But as we've been going through our sermon series, and we've been talking about living in a holy world, or a broken world, living holy in a broken world, there are some connection points between what Lion King would say about circle of life and what we think. The Christian worldview of the world that we live in is that it's broken, and that there is a right way for it to be, but we're not getting that. And our right way of being has less to do with the climate and the predators and the viruses, and more to do with how we relate to one another. That there's a right way for that to go, and that our world is broken. The Christian worldview is, the lions feel like they're the top of the food chain, so they have a responsibility to everything else. The Christian worldview is that humans at the top of the food chain have a responsibility to everything else. I mean, certainly environmentally we do, but even more importantly than environmentally, we have a responsibility. When we mess up, it has a way of bleeding into everything. Our sin, our corruption has a way of corrupting everything Scripture says. And so the way to bring some balance to that, the way to make to heal this broken world a little bit, it'll never be totally healed, but to address that is for Christians to choose to be holy. And if it is your first week, either online or here in person, it's not about you becoming some super saint who never does the wrong thing, because I don't think that's possible in this life. But holiness is making a decision that you're going to dedicate yourself to God. And you're going to dedicate your life to going the way that God wants you to go. And you're going to fall down, because everybody falls down, and you're going to make mistakes, but you're going to commit that when those things happen and when you get off track, you're going to get back on the path and you're going to follow God and you're going to put Him first, because we think as a church that when Christians do that, there's just a lot of verses. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, the Old Testament says, God's going to bless us. And I don't think that blessing is necessarily, it could be, but not necessarily material, but more the inner stuff: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, the stuff that makes the life worth living. And though this world is broken, and though we're broken, we can be reborn, the Bible says. We can be born again. And so this whole series has been about that. Today, the last chapter here, Peter's going to give some very basic advice about how older guys and younger guys kind of interact. And it's just a way to think about this. Donald Miller, I think I may have mentioned this before, but it's a really cool chapter in a book he wrote. He talked about getting to listen to the pilots once on a long flight, like across the ocean kind of flight, and he got to listen to the pilots as they were talking. And he was hoping to hear really technical, scientific kind of jargon, but most of what those guys talk about is what the weather's like. The guy who's flying ahead will say, hey, I'm in a pretty rough patch here at this altitude. You may want to avoid that. Or, hey, really good flying here. If you're at this altitude, you want to maybe go where I'm going. And they just talk to each other. And that picture, I think that's what church is supposed to be like. The older people who have lived a little longer will say to the younger people, hey, you want to avoid this. I went down this road. I know it's no good. Don't you do it. Because the only way that you learn in life is either to experience it yourself or to listen to someone else. That's the only way you ever learn in this life, is either read and discover it yourself or hear somebody and learn from their experience, or do it yourself. I know that some of you are, I have to touch the stove. I know there are people like that in the room. I can't trust anybody else to know how hot it is. I have to touch it myself. I know there are some of you that are like that. But you don't have to. And this model of some guys going on before who can tell the guys coming later on, hey, listen, here's the way you want to go. I went the other direction. I know it's no good. And that's what Peter's going to talk about today. So without further introduction, let's just get started. He says to the elders among you. And that word elders, the Greek word for that is presbyteros, which is where Presbyterians get their denomination name. Presbyterians, when it was founded, wanted to be a church where elders mentored younger people. They wanted their whole church to be based on that. So Presbyterians were going to be the elder church. Presbyteros means elder, and that's where they got it. And so to the elders among you, and really that's what we want to be as a Christian church. That's what churches should want to be. We want to be a church where the guys who went on before can help the guys coming along behind and tell them what's going on. And so to the elders, Peter says, I appeal to you as a fellow elder, and as a witness of Christ's suffering, who will also share in the glory to be revealed. You need to be shepherds of God's flock. Now that's under your care. There's a lot of stuff in this verse, so bear with me as I get through all of it. Different churches take different tacks on what elders are. There are some churches that would take the idea that an elder is anybody who is older. Anybody who's older is an elder. And at some level, that's not untrue. At some level, that's true. But what I think Peter's talking about here is a specific group amongst the older people who have made a decision to set themselves apart. You know, now in our church, the guys that we call elders are people that the church will select or elect every year, and they serve a couple of year term, and they'll be in charge of how we operate. Now, at some level, they need to be concerned about everything and how we operate, staff hires and and building and budget and all that stuff. At some level, they have to be concerned about all that, I suppose. But the main thing always, and really this is going to be my whole sermon, this is a theme. The main thing always is the relationship stuff. It's the relational component. And elders were supposed to be shepherds of God's flock. That's God's flock. It's not ours. We don't get any credit for it. This cemetery that's right here beside the church is a helpful reminder every time we come to church that one day we're going to have to hand everything over to somebody else. None of us get to control it forever, right? No matter who you are, you don't get to control it forever. Your time here is a limited time. And so during that time, for however long it has, we do the best we can to bring God's flock to where it needs to be. That has to be the main thing. I know there are some churches where the elders, all they do is building and budget and that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that anybody's right or wrong. That's not my place to tell another church what to do. But I will say at Mount Pleasant that shouldn't be our goal. I mean, the main function of the elders, it's right here in this verse, to be shepherds. Now, ranchers get behind all the animals and drive them forward. Maybe on a horse with a whip or something, and you're moving all the animals in front of you. A shepherd goes a different direction. He goes first. If you want to move a bunch of sheep, you just kind of get your hand under the jaw of one of them, and you kind of take that sheep where you want to go, and the other sheep will follow you and that one, and you can go lead the whole flock. And a shepherd does that. He goes first. Shepherd is an Old Testament phrase. Jeremiah talks about how Israel had bad shepherds at that time, and that God was going to get rid of those bad shepherds and bring in better ones. And it's in Jeremiah 23. There's a whole long section on that. David was a shepherd. Moses was a shepherd. And Jesus says about himself that I'm a good shepherd. In fact, before he leaves, he tells Peter, I want you to feed my sheep. He makes Peter a shepherd. And this notion of being a leader of people who goes out in front, who guides them, who takes the bullets first, if there are any bullets, who faces the wolves first, if there are any wolves. I mean, that notion that there's a shepherd who's in front of the flock, leading them where they want to go, that's biblical. It goes all the way back to the Old Testament, the very beginning, and that's still what we aspire to when we talk about an elder in God's church. Now, because of all that, with that as foundation, it is possible that what you could hear me saying is, oh, this sermon only relates to those 6 guys we get this week off. You could be hearing me say that, and that's not what I'm trying to say. Because I think anybody who has been in the faith a while owes it to the people who are coming along in the faith afterward to help them. I don't think this is just for the super saints. Now, that title of elder, that may be for the super saints, I mean the ones who really have dedicated themselves, but this notion that we're all helping people along. I think that everybody, it is, let me say it this way, it is healthy for you as a Christian to have someone in your life who you look at as a Christian parent, a Christian mentor, a Christian guide. And again, taking that airplane idea, someone who has flown ahead of you, they know where the hard patches are. They're telling you ahead of time, you want to avoid this. You want to get to this place if you can. Here's the best flying. You want somebody who can show you those things because they've done it. And so if you're someone who's done it, you owe it to the people who are coming behind to help them along. And if you're someone who's just coming along, you owe it to yourself to have somebody that you can. In fact, I believe this strongly enough that I won't do this, I won't embarrass anybody, but I should be able to ask you who's a spiritual parent in your life, and you would give me a name. And it's not somebody who you knew 20 years ago, but you don't talk to anymore. It's somebody that you get together with occasionally, and you just talk. I mean, maybe you go through a study of some sort, but you mainly just, you talk about your life. You try to figure it out. Life's hard, and it's hard when you're, in my own life, I'm 53, I look back at how my life has went, and it reads like a novel now. I can see ahead of time because God did this, and that thing happened, and then this happened because of that, and I can see how it all pieces together. But when you're just living it, it's chaos. You don't know anything. You're just doing the best you can all the time, and you should, as a Christian, a wise Christian, have somebody in their life that they can lean on. Now, it would be bad form if any of the older people stood out in the foyer and said, here to mentor someone. Who will come under my wing? No older person is going to do that. And if they did, it would look bad. it might not be the worst idea in the world if you've already got some contact with some guys who are younger and just get started, for you to just, hey, why don't we get together for coffee sometimes, or why don't we get together and just talk? Sometimes that's really appreciated. And if you're younger, going up to an older guy and say, can you mentor me to understand who Jesus is, that's probably going to scare a lot of guys. So you don't have to do that, but just, can we get together some? It's the relationship. It's mostly about the relationship. And that's what Peter's hitting on here, and what he's going to continue to hit on this whole chapter. He says, actually I'm repeating, that first line was on this first slide. The last line is the same thing. This whole first section of 1 Peter 5, it's really big sentences, and it was hard to get it in one slide that you could read. So I'm trying to break it up, but I want you to catch the context. He says, be shepherds of God's flock that's under your care, watching over them. He says, not because you must, because you're willing, as God wants you to be. So there's a lot in here. First of all, okay, he's telling you how to be a shepherd, how to do that. Well, how do you do it? Well, don't do it because you have to. You do it because you want to. What if I don't want to? Well, then at some level, you're off the hook. But I'm going to tell you that's a character problem if you're somebody who has went on before and you're not willing to help people coming along afterward. But if that's where you're at, that's where you're at. And I'm not judging. I mean, that's where you're at. I don't know. If you're not there, you're not there. I have seen people in ministry for sure. One of the sad parts to me, and I hope this never happens to me, but I guess it could. I hope it never does, is the minister who no longer really wants to do it, but he feels like he has to. What else am I going to do? And he just kind of locked into it. I hope I never get to that place. It is still exciting to me to write this stuff and try to figure it out and try to study it and understand it and try to explain it. I hope it always stays exciting to me. I think for those guys who are just marking time, that's not what God wants. That's not his big dream for you, that you have to do it. All the service stuff we do, all of it, it's not a life sentence. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. And again, we got up the last 2 or 3 weeks talking about volunteers. We need volunteers the next couple weeks. We do. I have tried, I don't know if it's come off or not, I have tried to guilt some of you into doing it. I don't know if that's come off, but I have. It's been on purpose. If you notice that, if you left and said to one another in the car, I think he's trying to guilt us into something like that. Well, I am. I am trying to do that. Because for the next month, it's a tough stretch. But that too is not a life sentence. It's not. And if you really don't want to do it, then don't do it. I mean, it really is free. You don't have to. I will suggest to you, if you always say no, that might be a character problem. But it is what it is. If that's where you're at, that's where you're at. And that also could be a guilt thing, I guess, thinking about it. But that wasn't my intention. The other stuff was very much my intention. The second thing happened accidentally. But the life sentence part of it. When we were in California, and I think I've mentioned this before, there was a lady named Alice who had worked in the nursery for 43 years. She had been in the nursery at that church for 43 years. Every Sunday, more or less, for 43 years she worked the nursery. And she had finally gotten to, because of arthritis and just getting older, she just couldn't pick the kids up. It was too much. So we had a big event for her. We gave her a little thing, some presents, and just really appreciated it. I mean, 43 years. And one of the elders got up and said something. This elder had been at the church for 30 years or so, and Alice was always there. She was there before I got there. She's always been watching the little guys, and we just, we can't thank her enough. And now that she's gone, of course, we're going to need some of you guys to step up and do it. And you could just see people in the church thinking, 43 years? I'm not signing up for that. And you don't have to sign up for that, right? I mean, well, you don't. And even if you do sign up for something, I've always thought ministry, the way to figure out what ministry you should do is to do something. And if you volunteer to do something and it's not for you, then it's not for you. That's okay. That's not a character problem. If I'm trying to do, I thought I would like to teach. I tried to teach. I hate that. I don't want to do that anymore. Okay, well then don't do that. Let's try something else. But to not serve at all is a problem. But to say this one thing, that's not for me. Okay. And eldership, more than most things, man, you need to want it. And if you don't want it, then don't do it. I mean, it's the worst thing in the world. The elder or a deacon or a leader in the church who signs up for it out of guilt or whatever, and they just have no passion for any of it. or all they do is just mark board meetings. It's not the goal. It's the relationship. It's got to be more. All right, same thing. It's a really long sentence. Taking that same first part of the clause here, be shepherds of God's flock, Peter lists 3 different things that he wants you to think. First thing is, don't do it because you have to, but because you're willing. That's first thing. Second thing, he says, don't do it because you're pursuing dishonest gain, but be eager to serve. This might be more of a problem for ministers, guys who get paid by the church, than it is for elders, but I think it can bleed into everybody. If your only reason to do it is for the reward you get here on earth, it's not enough. You won't get enough reward for it to be worth it, and if that's your only motive, that's not going to be a good example to the flock. I don't know how much money a minister should make, but there is a cap, and fair or not fair, there is a cap. There's a point where it's just too much. It's just too much, and I don't want to make fun of somebody else and what they do or what their church is like, but there's a point. It's not like a job like other jobs. It's not a job like other jobs. A lot of other jobs, I will say to you, make as much as you can. You know, if they'll pay you an extra $1 million to do it, go get your $1 million. But ministry is not the same thing. Now, I don't think ministry should be dirt poor all the time, especially if most of the church is not dirt poor all the time. But it can't be about the money. It makes me mad as a minister when other ministers say, that's not my job. I need you to do this. That's not my job. That just ticks me off, because what it implies is I'm only going to serve if I get something out of it. And if I'm not getting something out of it, I ain't serving. It just ticks me off. Could you do that in any other relationship? Could a kid do that to the parent? Sorry, Dad, it's not my job. I mean, I can't even imagine. My dad is 75. I'm still scared to death of him. I can't even imagine saying that as a teenager. Hey, sorry, Dad, it's not my job. I don't know what your house was like. We would have had violence in my house after that. Verbal violence for sure, but maybe some physical violence. I mean, there was just no way I would have tossed that out at my dad. It would just, you can't do that. And if you're, again, looking at this from a biblical perspective, Christ paid everything for you. You're not your own. The word that gets used as much really as any other word in the New Testament to describe our relationship to Jesus is the Greek word doulos, which sometimes in your New Testament gets translated servant, but more often gets translated slave. We belong to Him if we're Christians. It's not my job. Can't ever be your deal. And Peter's saying, I want you to be shepherds of God's flock. You put them first, not because of what you get out of it. You may not get anything out of it, because you're eager to serve. And again, why should we be eager to serve? Because Jesus served. And if you're going to be set apart as a leader, then you should do it. I want to say again, on all of this, it's possible for you to think of the 6 guys Mount Pleasant has called elders and think I'm only talking to them, and I'm not. I'm talking to anybody who has been in the church for some time. Truthfully, if you have been an elder in the past, you're still an elder in God's eyes. I don't think you get to retire from that. You can retire from board meetings. You can retire from budget considerations. You don't get to retire from shepherding. You don't get to retire from taking care of the guys who are coming after you. And that's true whether you're in church or in your family or whatever else. I mean, we just have an obligation as people to do that. I'm getting off track. So there's that. Last clause. He says, first of all, do it because you're willing, not because you have to. Second thing, don't do it because of dishonest gain, but because you want to serve. Third thing, be shepherds, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. Sadly, if you've ever been in church very long, and certainly if you've been a leader in church ever, at any church, in any denomination, you have seen people who lord it over others. You have. It might be a committee chairman. It might be a Sunday school, a teacher or superintendent. It might be an elder or a deacon. It might be the preacher. He does lord, and everybody knows it. It might be some older lady in the church that everybody's scared to death of because they don't go on her wrong side. It could be a powerful family in the church, and everybody knows they gave a lot of money to the church because their name's on the stained glass window. It doesn't matter who it is, but if you've been in church very long at all, especially as a leader, you have seen that. It's embarrassing because it's talked about real directly. We can't ever do that. It's just not who we are. And Peter says, if people have been entrusted to you, if you're a leader, an older person in the church, man, you can't lord it over them. Which means that you're not always going to get your way on minor things. I mean, you don't get to have all the votes about what songs we sing and what chairs we sit in and what color different things are. You don't get to have all the votes. And gradually, and it's a painful reality for me, you've got to keep trusting younger people to make those decisions for a couple reasons. First of all, because as an older person, I want to guide the younger person. And second of all, because I won't be here forever. It's not my flock. It's his. When we were in California, I discovered, and we were having a conversation, a lot of English names or Anglo names translate into Spanish. And some of them make a lot of sense, like Peter goes to Pedro or John to Juan. Some don't make as much sense. James goes to Santiago, which I don't understand why that is, but it is. But Jeff doesn't go to anything. Jeff was apparently just English. It doesn't go to Spanish, and doesn't translate that way. And so I found out that Jeff is Jefe in Spanish, which is close to Jeff. Jefe means boss. So you just call me Jefe, right? You just call me that, and I'll be Jefe. That'll be my deal. That or Gran Queso. Either of those two things, I'll be okay with either of those. So it was like a joke, right? It was like a joke. Just call me Jefe. But I had an elder out there come to me, and we were talking and said, I don't really like you making that joke because, as leaders here, we are the jefes of the church, and I just can't disagree with that more than I do. It just would not be possible for me to disagree with that more than I do. He says we do all these things because Jesus is coming back, and when he comes back, he's going to reward those people who built into others. Again, talking primarily about the office of elders, but not just them. Any of the older people, and all of us, Lord willing, will be older one day. And how you invest in the people coming after you, right? We're all in the chain. You're either at the very back of the chain, learning from people ahead, or you're at the very top of the chain and you're giving back to people coming after. And we're all working to bring one another because we know God's going to reward it. He says, in the same way, and this is kind of instructive about how he's been talking about elders. He's been talking about the elders need to be humble, need to serve, need to give, not because they're getting anything out of it, because they want to bless, right? Over and over and over again. In the same way, he says, the same way I've told the elders they've got to give, I'm telling you younger guys, you need to submit. Now, what submit does not mean is obey. It doesn't mean obey. If the guy in charge, whoever that person is lording it over you, you've got an obligation to say enough. If the person in charge is taking the church down a bad path or taking his little group down a bad path, you've got an obligation to say something. If it's God's flock, if they're making it all about them or you've got an obligation. So it's not always giving in, it's not always obeying, but it is a deferential respect. They're older and they've been through some things, and so you always show a grace there. And if you're younger, you don't always fight to get your way. When I was a young man, a church had just barely become a Christian. I hadn't been a Christian very long, and a church that I was aware of in our area, not a neighboring church that we had done some things with, they split. And I was just a teenager. I didn't care about a lot of any of that. But it was a deal. I remember it being talked about, and what I heard people talking about was a lot of the older people and people who had some money, they stayed behind. And they had the building. There was just a few of them left there in that building. And then a lot of the younger and the passionate and all the excitement, they went and started their own thing. And they had all this youth and passion and excitement, but they had no wisdom. And they had no money. All the wisdom and the money was back at the other church, and they had no passion. And they had no excitement. And we need each other. And when it's working the right way, elders know that. And they listen to the passion and the energy of the youth. And the youth here know that, and they respect and submit to the wisdom and the maturity of the older people. That's what Peter's saying here. He says, all of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another because God opposes the proud. So whenever you veer from this, whether you're an elder lording it over people or you're a younger person who is refusing to listen to anybody, wherever you're at in that thing, God's against you when you forget yourself. It's common. Imagine like a story problem here, okay? Imagine a mom and a dad, and they've got a kid, and the kid has taken to being hard to get hold of. Kid leaves school, and it can be 7, 8 o'clock, sometimes 9 or 10 o'clock, sometimes 11 or 12 o'clock, and they don't know where the kid is. And then they've the kid had always been a pretty good kid, but now we're seeing this happen more and more, and there's been a few small conversations, some passive-aggressive stuff, some eye rolls. We've never really talked about it. So mom and dad sit the kid down, and they say to the kid, listen, we can't keep doing this. We just can't keep doing this. We don't know where you're at. And the kid says, with these really, like the kitten eyes, the really big, watery eyes, but don't you trust me? Now, first of all, what should parents say to that? No. Why? Because you were kids, right? You know exactly where that road goes. So that's the first thing you should say. But that what hopefully as a more thoughtful conversation. That trust goes both ways. Don't you trust me, who have lived longer, who have seen a few more things, that maybe I know something too? In church, when we talk about this trust deal, the younger people want to be trusted to do what they know is right, but the older people want to be trusted too, that they've seen a few things. And when it works the right way, it shuffles together neat. And that's what Peter's hoping for here. But when it doesn't work the right way, the person who's being the problem, whoever that is, on whichever side, God hates that sort of thing. That's what this verse says behind me. He says, humble yourselves then under God's mighty hand, so he'll lift you up in time. And then next, cast your cares on him, your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. That highlighted part at the bottom is 1 Peter 5:7. It's a great memory verse all by itself. All by itself, it tells you that when you're feeling anxious, you can cast your anxiety on God. He cares for you. That'd make you feel better if you're in an anxious moment. But in the context of what we're talking about, right? He's talking about the anxiety that the older people feel when the younger people aren't listening. He's talking about the anxiety that the younger people feel when the older people aren't listening. And God's saying, you just need to trust me in this thing. You need to trust me in this thing. It is mostly about relationships. And most of the stuff that people want to fight on, back and forth, it's not that. In one of my churches that I served, we had an older guy who would sit kind of close to the front, and when the band would start to play, he would put his fingers in his ears. And you could see him from behind. It wasn't like it was like this. You could see that he had his fingers in his ears. And we finally had to say something to him. A new person coming to the church might like or not like the songs, but they all will wonder why the old man has his fingers in his ears up in the front of the deal. We've got to all get along. We've got to figure out some way to all get along. And if you don't like totally what everybody else is doing, then take it to God. Because the main thing is that we have to love each other. Just one more verse. I'm almost done. He says, it's a long sentence again. It's 2 slides, but it's one big idea. He says, be alert and of sober mind. He says, your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, and he's seeking someone to devour. Again, as a memory verse, just as a memory verse, this is pretty cool all by itself. He says it's evocative, right? Your enemy, the devil, is out there and he's looking to get somebody. And so if you struggle with addiction, or if you struggle with some persistent sin, like maybe you look at pornography and it's just eating up your mind, and it's clouding how you think about women, or maybe you drink, and people don't realize how much you're drinking when it's just you by yourself quiet, and you're finding you need to drink just to get to sleep, and you need to drink just to kind of function, and you can see it getting worse, and it worries you just a little bit, but you're dealing with it. Or it can be anything like that, right? Any secret thing that you're dealing with. A verse like this has some power, and all by itself has some power. Man, okay, I see what I'm up against now. The devil's like a roaring lion. I need to resist him. So let me rest the sentence here. Resist him, stand firm in faith, because the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of stuff. So nothing's happening to you. It's not happening to other people. And we can resist him. We can resist the devil, and we can find strength to do it. And by itself, like I said, it's a good memory verse. But in context, he's still talking about how older people and younger people relate to one another. So when he talks about resisting the devil, what's he talking about? He's talking about getting along. He's talking about elders shepherding not because they must, but because they want to. He's talking about younger people submitting to their elders, not obeying, but trying to understand that we're all like we don't teach a lot about the devil, I guess, in church, but he has lots of different job descriptions in the Bible. The word Satan, with a capital S, means the devil, but with a small s, that word Satan means accuser. So his number one job is to accuse. That's his number one job, is to accuse and how that manifests for you is those quiet moments when you just feel unworthy of everything. It's like that steady whisper in the back of your head. You're too dumb for this. You're too ugly for this. No one's listening to you. Or you're reminded of the dumb things you've done, or how you've fallen and how you failed and how you don't have it and how they aren't. It's all that stuff. Just whisper, whisper, whisper. And sometimes that's enough to make people destroy themselves. And it really is the devil's main thing. He just whispers that all the time. That's why a song like we did earlier, I am who God says I am, is important. I'm not who I feel like I am. I'm who God says I am. And that's it. But that's one job. The tempting thing is certainly a job that the devil has. He's called a tempter. And so he makes sin look attractive, and because he wants to get you away from God. He is a distorter. He's a liar, Jesus says. He's a liar and the father of lies. So he distorts the truth, right? It makes it foggy, so you don't understand for sure what you should do next and those kind of things. But one of the devil's big jobs, I think, is he's a divider. He divides people, splits up husbands and wives, splits up parents and children, splits up neighbors, splits up churches. His big thing is to divide. And so when he's talking, Peter here is about resisting the devil. Don't let him do that to you. Because the main thing is not the things, it's the people. And I really could preach on this all afternoon. I don't know if you can even appreciate that. I mean, I really could talk about this all day. This is the main thing. This is it. And a lot of people miss it. When God's asking us to be holy, he's asking us not so much to avoid smoking or drinking or chewing tobacco. Though maybe that's all a good idea. I'm not saying that's a bad idea to avoid those things, but that's not what he's saying. The main thing he's saying is you have to love one another. And you've got to lift one another up, and we are all in this together. And when the church is doing what it's supposed to do, man, it's magic. There's just nothing like it. I mean, there's such a power in it. Lives are coming back together. People are coming back together. We don't fight about stupid little things. We stay focused on the main things all the time. And the main thing is always people. Have the band come back up, if they don't mind. I read this week, I didn't know it, the most popular best-selling book of all time is the Bible. You guys knew that. I knew that too. But the number two most printed book of all time is Pilgrim's Progress. I didn't know that till this week. It's number two all time. The Bible's number one. Pilgrim's Progress, written in the 1600s, is the second most printed book of all time. And Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory, and it uses a lot of metaphor to talk about the Christian journey. And the main character, whose name is Christian, goes from the city of destruction to the celestial city. And it talks about going to heaven, basically, and how we get there and what you have to do. And there's one scene in the middle of the book where the path goes between these two big lions. And they're huge, and they're clawing at the path, and they're trying to scrape at the ground, trying to get to the path and to get to the Christian as he's on it. And when he gets there, they're getting close enough they can move his clothes. And he can feel them. He can feel their breath on him, and he's just terrified to take a step. And so his guide, who's there with him, says, but notice they're chained. They have these big chains on their necks. They can't get you as long as you stay on the path. And so the Christian walks between the lions, and it's intimidating, and it's scary because he can see them right there, but as long as he stays on the path, he's going to be fine. And that allegory, that metaphor, it's true. The devil's always looking for someone to rip up, but as long as you stay on the path, you're going to be fine. And for the people in the church who are older, your job on that path is to help bring the others along. And for the people in the church who are younger, your job is to find a spiritual parent who can help you get to where you need to go. And you all bear some responsibility for that. Everybody's on that chain somewhere. And so do it. Do it. We're going to be talking over the next couple of months about the value of discipleship and the value of learning from someone else and having someone else invest in you. But this really is the trick. And when I think about my own personal life and growing in Christ, it has always been different people who invested in me and helped me get to where I need to be. And we all need that. And if you as a church are all hoping that you can get all of that from me on the Sunday mornings that you're able to attend, it's not enough. It's just not enough. And so I want you to pray about that thing. I want you to pray about where maybe you can get on this thing and get back on the path that's going to take you where you want to go. Won't you stand up with us?